Welcome back to The Shadows. Before we uncover tonight's archived file, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never get lost in the dark. The freezing iron of the cellar hearth was already slick with a mixture. It was slick with a mixture of dried animal bile and cold mountain ash. Marcus felt the first sharp pain split the back of his dry throat in dark. It did not bleed at all, nor did it burn like ordinary flesh under a blade. Instead, a dry crystalline crust formed instantly along his swollen gums. It tasted heavily of oxidized copper scrap and damp, stale river silt. His sister Clara sat 4 feet away in the absolute stone darkness. She sat in the freezing darkness of the stone basement with her head down. Her cold body was completely rigid as an ancient oak timber post. Her eyes were locked onto the black hearth in the damp basement wall. It was where their father had burned the final leather strap of his boots. He had burned the strap in the hearth exactly 3 long hours before. The rule of the unbroken fast of St. Jude was completely absolute now. It required no spoken warnings or soft whispers from the family elders. After the mountain sun dropped below the pine ridge of Blackwood Basin, no vocal sound could cross a human lip in the dark house above or below, lest the living breath draw the wandering spirit straight into the chest. Marcus swallowed hard, forcing the metallic lump down his cold gullet. He forced it down without letting out a single dry, rasping sound in dark. He knew that the thing moving softly across the floorboards directly above. It was moving directly above their heads, listening for a tiny click. It listened intently for the tiny dry click of his trembling teeth. The leather-bound ritual manuscript laying open on Marcus's knees was old. It was not written in standard black ink or dry charcoal on rag paper. Its thick parchment leaves were deeply gouged with a sharp iron stylus. The gouged grooves were filled with a pale gray powder in the dark book. It sparkled faintly whenever dying embers of the hearth pulsed in draft. The text belonged to a vanished 19th century parish congregation, a congregation that had sealed its homes against the winter of 1888, documenting step by step how an entire family could starve the entity, starving the entity known as the Ash Eater by surrendering every word. They surrendered every spoken word to the flames of the central hearth. In the ledger, the parish elder had carved a chilling, dark warning, a warning that made Marcus's pulse race violently against his ribs. The dark entity did not enter a home through shattered window panes, nor did it enter through forced cellar latches in the dark night air. It entered through the empty acoustic space left behind in silence, left behind when a man held back his true thoughts in the freezing dark. The floorboards above groaned under a heavy wet drag in the kitchen, a sound like a weighted sack of soaked grain being pulled across raw pine planks toward the cold iron kitchen stove. Marcus watched Clara's chest rise and fall in shallow, silent bursts. She pressed her knuckles into her apron to stop her fingers shaking. Their father had gone up the narrow cellar stairs at midnight alone, carrying a heavy iron poker and a jar of blue clay in his cold hands, intending to seal the gaps in chimney masonry where cold winds sang. He had not returned, yet his heavy leatherwork boots walked on. They continued to walk the perimeter of the pine floor above them, stepping with a slow, deliberate rhythm that stopped over joists. It stopped directly over hearth joists every 4 minutes in dark. As Marcus strained his eyes in the pitch black of the cold cellar floor, a thin stream of fine white ash began to drift downward silently. It drifted through gaps in the ceiling wood, settling on Clara's hair. It settled upon Clara's braided hair like pale, freezing winter frost. Marcus reached out his hand in the dark, his fingers finding the iron, finding the rough iron bodkin resting beside the ancient manuscript. The instructions for the 4th night demanded a physical record kept, a record of every sound heard within the house carved into the hearth, carved into the bone pulp lining before morning mist cleared the valley. He pressed the sharp point into the soft calcified stone surface, tracing the outline of heavy dragging sound that circled the kitchen. As iron tip bit into hearth, a sudden cold draft rushed down pipe, carrying the scent of damp river peat, stale tallow, and rot hemlock. The dragging sound stopped, and a faint dry scraping began above. It began directly on the upper side of the heavy oak cellar door, as though 10 bone-tipped fingers were tracing the wooden grain latch. The scraping against the cellar latch did not possess a frantic energy. It did not possess the frantic energy of a trapped beast in the dark. It was a rhythmic, methodical carving that matched the exact speed. It matched the exact speed of Marcus's iron bodkin moving on stone. It moved continuously against the cold hearthstone in the basement. Clara slowly shifted her weight upon the cold dirt floor in darkness. Her trembling hand reached out to touch Marcus's sleeve gently. She touched his coat sleeve with a pressure so light and trembling. It felt like a fallen, dry winter leaf landing in the pitch-black air. She gestured toward the far corner of the subterranean cellar space. It was where ancient stone foundation met the damp earth of root pit. There, embedded flush within dry-stacked masonry, was a wood door. It was a narrow wooden inspection door that their grandfather built. He had nailed it shut 40 long years prior during timber blights. The iron nails securing the oak frame were long rusted into flakes. They were rusted into flakes in the damp, stagnant cellar draft. But the blue clay used to seal the perimeter had fresh dark cracks. The dry clay had fresh, deep cracks running through its surface. It was oozing a clear, viscous fluid in the pitch-black chamber. The thick fluid smelled strongly of bitter river salt and mud. Marcus held his breath and motioned for Clara to remain pressed. He motioned for her to remain pressed against the cold hearth wall, while he dragged himself toward the root pit on his knees in dark. The floor beneath him was no longer dry, hard-packed soil at all. It had turned into a soft, sponge-like matrix of decaying needles, a wet matrix of decaying pine needles and crushed river shells, and pale, fibrous roots that twitched slightly whenever he moved. They twitched whenever his heavy boots made contact with the mud. He lifted his small brass lantern, keeping the shutter narrowed down. He kept the shutter narrowed so only a thin thread of light cut. A thin thread of amber light cut through the freezing gloom around. The beam fell directly upon the ancient manuscript resting on lap. It illuminated the dark entries for the 5th night of the fast. The script of the old elder grew jagged and wide across the page. The gouges were cutting completely through parchment leaves in dark. The family must not look upon the face of the one who walks, for the entity wears physical memory of household like an old coat. It wears the physical memory like an old, worn wool coat in dark, taking its shape from the voices buried within chimney soot. A heavy metallic thud echoed from top of cellar stairs in darkness. The iron latch finally gave way with a loud, sudden, sharp snap. The heavy oak door swung open against wall with an agonizing creak. A slow, agonizing creak that rattled heavy floorboards overhead. Marcus froze completely, his heart hammering in his dry throat. As sound of heavy leather boots began a slow descent down steps. They began a slow descent down 12 wooden steps into the cellar. The footsteps did not stumble in the absolute dark of the room. They landed with flat, deliberate weight upon every oak board. Each step was accompanied by soft, dry rustle of spilling salt. It sounded like fine salt spilling continuously from an open sleeve. Through narrow gap in stairs, Marcus caught a glimpse of a coat. A long wool coat caked in gray ash and dried river mud in dark. Its heavy hem was dragging through dust like wet, heavy canvas. The figure paused on 6th step, its boots turned toward hearth. It turned toward cold hearth where Clara sat motionless in dark. The entity did not possess a human face under shadow of its hat. Where its mouth and eyes should have been, blue clay had dried. A smooth, thick layer of river clay had dried into deep fissures. geometric fissures that sparkled with white salt crystals below. They sparkled faintly beneath thin thread of amber lantern light. It did not speak, nor did it let out a single breath in dark. Yet a low vibration hummed through oak steps beneath its boots, repeating exact cadence of their father's voice calling Marcus by his full middle name during spring harvest past. Marcus gripped iron bodkin until his knuckles turned white in dark, realizing with a wave of ice-cold dread that voice was rising. The voice was not coming from figure on stairs at all in dark. It was rising directly from dark open pit of root cellar behind, where wooden inspection door swung silently inward into black earth. The darkness inside the root pit possessed a dense, damp weight. It possessed a weight that seemed to press directly against ribs. It pressed against the cold cartilage of Marcus's ribcage in dark, his lungs filled with heavy perfume of ancient river silt around, dried mountain ash, and faint metallic tang of copper coins in bowl. Coins left to oxidize continuously in a wooden bowl in cellar, standing 2 feet inside the narrow threshold of inspection door. The figure in the ash-caked wool coat remained completely motionless. Its boots were wedged into a deep seam of pale blue clay wall, a seam of blue clay that ran continuously along dirt foundation. The entity's head was tilted at an unnatural, rigid angle in dark, as though it were listening to slow crystallization of salt around, listening to salt crystallizing silently within the stone masonry. Marcus kept the shutter of his brass lantern narrowed down close. He narrowed it to a hairline sliver, illuminating only lower hem. Illuminating only the lower hem of long wool coat in pitch black, where small chunks of petrified mud fell continuously to floor, disintegrating into fine gray powder before striking damp ground. The open manuscript on Marcus's lap vibrated with a low pulse, a faint low pulse that matched the rhythmic tapping of boards. It matched tapping of floorboards directly above kitchen hearth. He slid his thumb along deeply gouged parchment in cold dark, tracing the entries written for 6th night of unbroken fast. The 6th night of unbroken fast of St. Jude in Old Ledger. The 19th century elder had carved a precise inventory here, a precise geometric inventory of the house's structural joists, noting that entity did not move through solid timber or stone. It did not move through solid timber or stone by force at all. It expanded along invisible thermal lines created in cold air, created where human breath condensed against cold basement walls. If the silence is broken by so much as a heavy gasp, text read, the iron stylus having torn deep crescent wounds through paper. Deep crescent wounds torn through fibrous paper leaves of book. The clay inside root pit will draw moisture from tongue fast, leaving mouth filled with white river salt before midnight. Marcus swallowed hard, forcing his trembling jaw to stay locked. He watched a thin spiral of blue clay slowly unwind from wall. It unwound from dirt wall, reaching toward Clara's bare ankle. Reaching toward her bare ankle in dark like a blind root growing. Clara did not scream, nor did she pull her leg back in dark. She did not pull her leg back into shadows of cold hearth wall. She raised her left hand with agonizing slowness in pitch black, pointing her index finger toward dark ceiling joists overhead, where their father's iron wood-carving chisel remained wedged. It remained wedged firmly between 2 oak planks in ceiling wood. The tool was covered in a thick layer of blue clay in dark. Blue clay that had dried into a series of sharp ridges above. Sharp crystalline ridges forming exact shape of inverted cross. Marcus realized with a wave of ice-cold clarity in his chest. Their father had not been dragged down cellar stairs at night. He had not been dragged down during his midnight trip to fix wall. He had been drawn upward through narrow gaps in pine boards, his body compressed and reshaped to fit hollow spaces inside, to fit hollow spaces between lath and plaster walls of house. As Marcus watched, a small drop of dark viscous tallow fell. It fell from wooden handle of chisel, landing upon parchment. landing upon open parchment of ledger with a soft, dry hiss. A soft, dry hiss that extinguished last glowing ember in hearth. The extinction of the hearth ember dropped the cellar into a blackness so total that Marcus could no longer distinguish the outline of his own raised hand in dark. Yet, within the absolute dark, his other senses heightened to a terrifying degree. He could hear the slow, granular grinding of blue clay expanding along foundation stones. He could smell the dry, suffocating dust of burnt bone rising from cold ashes near his boots. The figure in the wool coat shifted its weight with a sharp wooden crack, stepping out of the root pit and advancing 2 paces toward the floor center. The sound was accompanied by a soft, dry rustle, like dozens of dry parchment pages being turned simultaneously inside a heavy iron kettle. This dry rustling grew louder as salt crystals coating its long sleeves rubbed continuously against the rough wool fabric in total darkness. Marcus reached into his pocket with trembling fingers, his nails scraping against the small brass surveyor's compass he had found earlier. He had found the cold metal tool tucked inside his father's work apron back in the damp toolshed. The glass cover was missing from the frame, replaced by a thin film of dried tallow that smelled strongly of pine resin and river mud. As he held the brass compass flat against his cold palm, the iron needle did not point toward magnetic north at all. Instead, it spun frantically in continuous smooth circles before locking rigidly toward the cold hearthstone where Clara sat motionless. The ledger in his lap grew instantly hot, radiating an intense feverish warmth that burned through his denim trousers with terrifying speed. The sudden heat bound the leather cover to his flesh like molten lead in the damp basement air. He ran his trembling fingertips over the fresh gouges on the page, feeling sharp, raised edges of letters carving themselves into parchment. The new entry read with terrifying mathematical precision, documenting exact physical dimensions of cellar and the weight of soil. It documented the crushing weight of the dark soil pressing against the northern granite wall of the old house. The fast is no longer a ritual of avoidance, the text revealed, deep incisions glowing with a faint pale blue luminescence in dark. The eerie luminescence cast long, distorted shadows across the room, illuminating cold stone buttresses and damp mud flooring. It is a process of structural exchange. The ancient carved ledger continued to reveal to his reading eyes. For every hour the family remains silent within the stone foundation. Timber above absorbs 3 inches of river clay, replacing the hollow air of the silent rooms with petrified salt. The writing concluded across the leaf. Marcus raised his head slowly, his eyes tracking pale blue light as it illuminated the underside of the floorboards above. Embedded flush within oak joists directly above hearth were distinct impressions of 3 human faces. Their features were smoothed into featureless clay masks, their lips sealed forever beneath thick layers of white river salt. A sudden heavy thud echoed from the top of cellar stairs as the outer kitchen door slammed shut against the midnight gale. It locked the house completely from the outside with a sharp, echoing iron latch click that chilled his blood. The figure in the wool coat stopped its advance, its gaunt arms extending slowly toward ceiling joists above. It extended its arms as if measuring the exact distance between the cellar floor and the high roof ridge. From deep within hollow walls of house above, a low rhythmic humming began to resonate through dark timber. It was a dry, raspy sound that carried the precise cadence of an ancient church bell ringing beneath 30 feet of wet river silt. Marcus held the iron bodkin tight against his chest, watching in horror as pale blue clay began to slough off in heavy wet sheets. The clay sloughed off foundation walls, revealing thousands of tiny calcified bone fragments embedded deep within dark granite stones. The bone pulp hearth in the dark cellar beneath the ruined house had begun to radiate a cold, dry heat. This cold, dry heat crystallized every droplet of moisture on Marcus's exposed skin in the pitch-black air. Clara lay motionless against the dry stacked fieldstones, her eyes locked on the ceiling joists above. She watched where the heavy iron wood-carving chisel remained wedged, its handle caked in blue river silt. The absolute rule of the unbroken fast of St. Jude had transformed from a simple spiritual boundary. It turned into an inescapable physical trap where no human voice could safely cross a trembling lip. No air could be drawn sharply through a cold throat, lest soil beneath foundations reclaim the body, lest the cold, living soil beneath the stone foundations reclaim the human body in absolute silence. Marcus looked down at his lap, where the 19th century ledger lay open under the faint light. It lay open under the faint amber sliver of his brass lantern in the freezing cellar gloom. The gouged parchment leaves were no longer static inside the heavy, salt-stained leather binding. The dark crystalline powder inside the carved letters was shifting continuously in the dark book. It was reconfiguring the old Latin text into detailed structural inventories of shifting foundation. Detailed structural inventories that documented every shifting granite stone beneath the ruined home. The entry for the 7th night of the fast revealed a chilling truth that made blood run cold. It made the blood run cold in Marcus's veins as he traced the deeply gouged parchment lines. The elder had not written the manuscript to break the curse or to drive the entity back. He had not written it to drive the entity known as the Ash-Eater back into river clay. He had documented the exact process by which an entire family surrendered their physical voices, surrendering their spoken voices to reinforce the massive timber frame of the ancestral homestead. The wood above does not rot merely because of moisture, the carved text read in the dark cellar, the stylus marks cutting completely through the rag paper into the heavy leather backing behind. It decays because it lacks the living resonance of the human breath in the empty rooms. When a family holds their peace behind locked doors, the house absorbs their unsaid thoughts, replacing the hollow sap inside the oak beams with petrified river salt. The ancient text revealed. Marcus ran his thumb along the bottom margin, feeling sharp, raised edges of fresh geometric marks. Fresh geometric marks that were appearing slowly beneath his own dried blood on the cold parchment. They formed intricate mathematical patterns that burned with a faint, unnatural blue luminescence. A sudden sharp crack echoed through the subterranean chamber as the wooden inspection door split. The narrow wooden inspection door inside the root pit split violently down its middle in dark. The figure in the wool coat did not step through the threshold into the cellar room at all. It simply leaned its heavy upper body forward, its face remaining hidden behind thick blue clay, a thick layer of blue clay that had dried into deep geometric fissures beneath its brimmed hat. From within the dark cracks of its featureless mask, small streams of white salt poured continuously. They cascaded onto the damp dirt floor like sand through an hourglass in absolute stone silence. The entity reached out its gaunt arm, pointing a long bone-pale finger directly at the open ledger. It pointed directly at the open ledger on Marcus's knees as the cellar air grew instantly dense, smelling violently of oxidized copper scrap, stagnant river water, and dry, sweet mountain hemlock. Hemlock left to rot in an iron kettle above the cold kitchen hearth in the abandoned house. Marcus gripped his iron bodkin tighter, watching in silent horror as blue clay began to slough off. The pale blue clay on foundation walls sloughed off in heavy wet sheets, revealing calcified tongues. It revealed hundreds of calcified human tongues embedded deep within dark granite stone walls. The sloughing of the blue clay from cellar walls revealed an intricate subterranean lattice. It revealed an intricate lattice of roots, bones, and iron survey spikes beneath. These spikes bound the ancestral homestead directly to the bedrock of Blackwood Basin. Marcus dragged his trembling body backward against the cold stone hearth in dark, keeping his heels planted firmly in the soft soil as floorboards above groaned. The heavy floorboards groaned under an immense downward weight in the dark room. The entity in the ash-caked coat took 2 deliberate steps into the cellar. Its heavy leather boots sank 3 inches into the damp earth below, leaving deep prints that filled instantly with clear, salty brine and dark. It did not raise its hands to attack in the cold subterranean chamber, nor did it make a single sound through its sealed lips in darkness. Instead, The physical atmosphere around Marcus compressed violently with speed, pressing hard against his ears until a low metallic ringing hummed continuously. A low metallic ringing hummed through his skull in absolute stone quiet. The vibration carried the distinct rhythmic cadence of his father's voice past, repeating a single coordinate from an old land survey map over again, over and over in the dark cellar as cold air chilled his lungs. Marcus opened the manuscript to its 8th page with trembling cold hands, relying entirely on touch to guide the iron stylus along paper. His hand moved with an unnatural fluid speed that was no longer his. It was no longer entirely under his control in the pitch-black air. The bodkin tore deep crescents out of paper as he recorded dimensions, recording structural dimensions of cellar in clean geometric lines on page. The new text formed in clean geometric lines that sparkled beneath light, sparkling faintly beneath his fading lantern light in the damp room. The survey of Blackwood Basin was never completed by county clerk. The 32 chains running north from river were measured in lives, each boundary stone anchored by a family that went silent before, a family that went completely silent before the winter harvest came. Marcus felt his jaw lock tight as dry salt dust coated throat. The dry dust in the air coated the back of his throat, turning his saliva into a thick bitter paste that tasted of iron. It tasted heavily of oxidized copper scrap and wet river silt around. He looked at Clara, who had raised her trembling left hand slowly. She pressed 3 fingers against the center of her collarbone in dark, indicating that cold numbness in floor had reached her ribs now. The scraping sound against the cellar ceiling suddenly ceased in dark, replaced by a low rhythmic tapping directly on the stone hearth behind. 3 distinct raps echoed through granite, followed by a long pause, then 3 raps again, a signal matching exact code father used past. It matched the code his father used from timber woods in Fells. The figure in wool coat stopped its advance, clay mask tilting. Its featureless clay mask tilted slowly toward the central hearthstone, as the cracked granite began to split open along its central seam. Rising through fissure was not cold mud or groundwater from deep below. It was a dense pale pulp made of pulverized bone and ash, a pale pulp carrying an ancient surveyor's brass chain that swung. It swung slowly back and forth like a heavy pendulum in dark. Marcus watched brass links swing closer to his lap in silence, realizing that if metal touched parchment, boundary would be sealed. The final boundary of the house would be sealed forever in dark, trapping their voices beneath salt pulp floorboards for all eternal time. The swinging motion of the brass surveyor's chain created a low rhythmic whistling sound in the cold room. This whistling sound seemed to slice through the dense, salt-laden air of the subterranean cellar floor. Each time the metal links passed over the cracked granite hearth, tiny yellow sparks erupted from bone pulp. These yellow sparks illuminated Clara's pale face in brief, jagged flashes across the freezing darkness. She had not moved an inch from her position against the dry-stacked wall during the long night hours. Her skin had taken on the pale, translucent quality of river ice in the pitch-black basement air. Her dark veins showed clearly as violet threads beneath her cold cheeks as she remained silent. The entity in the wool coat stood perfectly still beside the root pit in the damp cellar earth. Its clay-masked head was tilted upward as if listening to heavy footsteps overhead in the kitchen. These footsteps continued to circle the kitchen floorboards directly above their heads in the dark. Marcus knew that the fast was no longer merely a matter of surviving the freezing night hours. It was a silent, desperate battle for the physical boundary of the ancestral house itself. The ledger across his knees felt unnaturally light now, its thick parchment pages vibrating with a hum. This high-pitched hum resonated directly in the metal fillings of his back teeth in the darkness. He dragged the sharp point of his iron bodkin through the pale gray powder in the grooves. He dragged it through the carved grooves of the 9th chapter, leaving a deep crimson streak. His own warm blood mixed instantly with the ancient ash inside the gouged parchment leaves. The text revealed that the house had been constructed over a forgotten parish marker long ago. It was laid down during the violent boundary disputes of 1882 in Blackwood Basin Valley, when 3 local families had vanished completely into the timber woods after attempting to record claims. Attempting to record their disputed land claims in thick iron ink on old county parchment pages. The soil does not recognize the signatures written on paper. The elder had gouged into paper. It honors only the weight of the silence kept within the cold stone walls, the ledger revealed. When the last tongue in the household ceases to form words, chain locks foundation into rock. The surveyor's chain locks the granite foundation permanently into the living rock beneath earth. Marcus raised his head slowly, taking care not to let his breath catch in his dry throat. He watched carefully as the entity in the ash-caked wool coat began to shift its heavy weight. The creature's gaunt fingers reached toward its own face, digging bone-white nails into clay. It dug its nails into the dried blue clay that covered its featureless face in the dark cellar. With a sickening dry crunch that echoed like snapping pine branches, it peeled away a long strip. It peeled away hardened silt from its cheekbone, revealing a solid mass beneath the clay mask. It revealed a solid mass of tightly packed river salt that glistened beneath the faint amber light. The salt did not spill onto floorboards. It began to expand outward in delicate needles. Crystalline needles reached toward the open manuscript on Marcus's lap like a pale frozen hand. A pale frozen hand trying to claim the final blank parchment page of the ancient ritual book. Marcus clamped his jaw tight against the bitter copper taste that flooded his swollen mouth, forcing himself to hold the heavy iron bodkin perfectly still above the gouged parchment page. He knew that if he allowed stylus to drop or if a single gasp escaped his dry lips, the crystalline salt would instantly bridge the distance between entity and book in dark, sealing his sister's name into the boundary record forever beneath the salt pulp floorboards. Clara's eyes met his through the gloom, her gaze cold and steady in the pale lantern light. She was silently urging him to complete the precise geometric calculations carved into margin. As he pressed the metal tip into paper to begin 10th entry, floorboards groaned violently above. They groaned as if an immense iron beam were being driven down through the roof ridge. The force of impact overhead sent a thick shower of pale white dust cascading down through ceiling gaps. This shower of pale white dust fell continuously through gaps in ceiling joists into dark room below. It completely covered cold hearth and open ledger in a fine, delicate layer of mineral frost. The heavy footsteps in kitchen above abruptly stopped, replaced by an absolute, suffocating quietness. This absolute quiet made blood roar in Marcus's ears like a distant mountain torrent in winter. Through haze of falling dust, figure by root pit stepped forward into main cellar chamber. Its heavy boots made no sound against sponge-like soil as it crossed threshold into room. The crystalline salt needles projecting from its torn cheek had grown 3 inches long now, curling inward like ribcage of a small forest animal in cold, freezing subterranean draft. They radiated an icy draft that turned Marcus's ragged breath into thick clouds of white vapor. Marcus guided his iron bodkin through mineral frost covering 10th page with trembling fingers. His fingers were numb with a deep bone-chilling cold that made heavy stylus feel frozen. It felt like a fragment of jagged river ice held tightly in his frozen palm. The carved script on parchment had changed color, turning from dull ash gray to bright silver, turning to a bright luminous silver that cast long sharp shadows against fieldstone walls. The boundary line has reached central hearth, text stated in deeply gouged leather binding. Deep gouges cut through final layer of rag paper into heavy leather binding beneath page. There are no longer 3 living witnesses inside house to hold silence against dark. The entity requires only 1 signature to complete physical transfer of timber frame now, while remaining souls become mortar that permanently seals cellar stone walls in salt. Clara slowly reached down toward her foot, fingers closing around heavy iron mason's hammer. A heavy hammer that had lain half-buried in damp dirt beside hearth since previous winter. She did not raise tool to strike at approaching entity in cold subterranean chamber. Instead, she placed flat iron head directly over central seam of cracked granite hearthstone, right where brass surveyor's chain continued its rhythmic, swinging motion in pitch darkness. She looked at Marcus, her pale face completely devoid of fear in faint amber lantern light. Her lips pressed together in a firm, unyielding line that refused to yield breath vibration. Marcus understood her silent intention instantly in dark. She was going to shatter Hearthstone. Shatter ancient Hearthstone before brass chain could complete its final pendulum arc above, severing physical anchor that bound entity directly to house's stone foundation below earth. The creature in wool coat seemed to sense her movement, gaunt body tensing in gloom. It raised both gaunt hands toward ceiling joists above, fingers flexing together in unison, flexing as if pulling on invisible iron wires embedded deep within solid oak timbers. The floorboards directly above Clara began to bow downward under tremendous localized weight. The drywood groaned and screamed under strain as long cracks opened along timber grain. Marcus drove point of iron bodkin into leather cover of ledger with all strength left, channeling entire focus into completing final geometric angle written on page in dark, completing it before oak ceiling collapsed downward onto cold stone floor of cellar. The heavy iron mason's hammer struck the central seam of granite hearthstone. It struck with a deafening crack that resonated through cellar like a gunshot. The ancient stone split cleanly down its center, exposing a deep, narrow fissure. A fissure filled with a dense, wet slurry of pulverized bone, clay, and salt. The rhythmic swinging of brass surveyor's chain was instantly broken in dark. The links tangled together in midair before falling into open fissure below. They fell with a heavy metallic splash into dense slurry beneath hearthstone. A sudden pressure wave surged outward from shattered hearth across cellar floor. It knocked Marcus onto his side and sent open manuscript sliding across soil, sending open manuscript sliding across damp dirt floor into cold darkness away. The blue bioluminescence emanating from carved pages flickered violently in room, its pale silver light turning into a harsh blinding gold that illuminated all. It illuminated every single corner of dark subterranean stone chamber in gold. The figure in ash-caked wool coat recoiled violently from shattered hearthstone. Its gaunt arms were raised to shield its featureless face as salt broken, as crystalline salt needles protruding from cheek fractured into fine powder. They fractured into fine white dust that dissolved into freezing cellar draft. The floorboards directly overhead groaned as localized weight abruptly shifted away, the heavy footsteps retreating toward outer walls of old ancestral house above. Marcus scrambled across floor on hands and knees through cold dark soil, his fingers closing around cold leather binding of ledger just in time, just as glowing gold light began to absorb all surrounding room shadows. The instructions for 9th chapter were burning themselves into parchment leaves. They burned in real time, dark powder forming sharp, angular letters on paper. Sharp, angular letters that cut straight through fibrous paper leaves in book. The boundary is broken when anchor stone falls. New burning text revealed. But parish record remains open until last living witness seals vault. Seals stone vault forever beneath floorboards of ruined house in silence. Marcus pulled himself up against dry-stacked foundation wall with great pain, his chest heaving as he watched Clara standing over shattered hearthstone wall. She had not let go of heavy iron mason's hammer in her hands. Her trembling hands were shaking with utter physical exhaustion in dark room, her face completely covered in a fine, delicate layer of white frost. A fine layer of white salt frost that sparkled beneath golden glow. The entity near root pit did not dissolve into dark living earth. Its body became stiff and rigid like a petrified tree trunk in dark, its featureless clay mask hardening into a solid, unyielding shell around face. a solid shell that locked its physical features forever in ancient salt. The air inside cellar began to clear slowly, cold draft washing through. The suffocating stench of river silt and tallow fading into clean draft. Fading into crisp, clean draft of autumn air rising through floorboard cracks. Marcus raised his heavy iron bodkin one final time in dark cellar, ready to trace concluding geometric lines that would lock ancient manuscript. Locking manuscript permanently before structure above could settle into foundation. The quiet that settled over subterranean vault was no longer oppressive silence. It was no longer oppressive, suffocating silence of unbroken fast at all. It was natural stillness of an abandoned place returning to cold earth. Marcus sat on cold dirt floor beside his sister in damp basement, the open ledger resting on his lap as golden light slowly faded away, fading from parchment into a soft, steady amber glow in dark room. The entries covering first 9 chapters had altered their appearance completely, the jagged gouges and dark powder smoothing out into clean dark lines. Lines that resembled precision ink of an old parish register in town. The 32 coordinates carved along margins resolved into a circle. A single continuous circle marking exact perimeter of old ancestral homestead, isolating land completely from surrounding dark forest of Blackwood Basin. He ran his fingers over 10th page, feeling cool, smooth texture. Feeling cool, smooth texture of rag paper where blood had dried. His own blood had dried into a clear, protective glaze across leaf. The manuscript no longer demanded physical sacrifice or unuttered thoughts. It no longer required them to maintain its ancient boundary record. Its pages had absorbed full structural history of Old Homestead House, binding structural memory of timber frame directly to leather binding cover. The census of parish is concluded, final paragraph read on page, the script forming with perfect mechanical clarity without iron stylus tool. The names of those who kept silence within walls are recorded. Recorded in deep granite beneath hearthstone forever in stone vault. No further boundary lines shall be drawn across this cold soil, and no voice shall be required to hold roof tree against wind. Marcus looked up at ceiling joists, where iron chisel remained wedged, where heavy iron wood-carving chisel remained wedged between oak planks. The blue clay caked around handle had dried and fallen away. It had fallen away in small flakes, revealing clean gray metal beneath. The heavy footsteps in kitchen above were completely gone in dark, replaced by soft, steady patter of cold autumn rain falling above. Rain falling against roof shingles 4 stories overhead in morning gray. Clara reached out and gently closed heavy leather cover of ledger, the iron clasp snapping shut with a sharp, clean click in cellar. A sharp, clean click that echoed through quiet stone cellar room. As clasp locked, faint amber glow vanished completely from darkness around, leaving room illuminated only by natural gray light filtering down slow. Filtering down through narrow cellar windows as dawn broke over ridge. The absolute stillness that enveloped basement of Blackwood Basin did not signal end. It did not signal end of Valley's ancient appetite in dark stone room. It marked exact moment surrounding landscape absorbed structural foundation into soil. It absorbed structural foundation directly into its unmapped subterranean dirt soil. Marcus sat motionless upon damp dirt, his bleeding palm still pressed tight. His palm was still pressed against smooth leather cover of ancient manuscript. Beside him, Clara kept her eyes locked on shattered granite hearthstone wall, where dense slurry of bone and silt had hardened into crystalline mass. A solid crystalline mass reflecting pale morning light filtering through grates. The heavy iron mason's hammer lay motionless in cold subterranean cellar mud. Its cold metal head was permanently bonded to granite seamed by salt. Bonded to granite seamed by a thick layer of dried white salt. Overhead, floorboards of kitchen no longer groaned under weight of steps. The timber frame had settled into an unbroken silence across cold house, as if ancestral house had stood empty for 100 long years. The 19th century ledger lay quiet across Marcus's lap in cellar gloom, its fibrous parchment leaves completely saturated with blood and river salt. Salt spilled during final exhausting hours of unbroken fast of St. Jude. The carved geometric symbols along margins had ceased their eerie glowing now, resolving into fine dark lines resembling precision engravings of ancient map. Resembling precision engravings of an old land surveyor's boundary parish map. Marcus ran his thumb across 10th chapter, feeling hard raised edges. Feeling hard raised edges of script where ink had petrified into paper. The text did not detail further rituals or demand additional living sacrifices. It set forth a rigid physical inventory of ancestral parish boundary line, establishing that 32 chains running north from river were locked permanently. They were now locked beneath stone foundations of old cellar hearth wall. The entity known as Ash Eater had not retreated into deep clay. It had been integrated directly into subterranean masonry structure of homestead, its physical presence serving as permanent mortar holding oak beams against winds. Holding oak timber beams securely against cold, howling mountain winds above. Marcus slowly pulled himself to his feet, his muscles stiff with cold. Stiff from freezing dampness that lingered in corners of subterranean cellar. He reached down and offered his trembling hand to Clara beside him, assisting her as she stepped over hardened fissure in granite hearthstone. Her face remained pale and caked in white salt frost in morning, but her breathing had returned to a slow, steady rhythm without rasp. It no longer carried dry, metallic rasp of cellar atmosphere in dark. Together, they moved toward narrow wooden stairs leading up to kitchen, leaving brass lantern and iron bodkin resting beside shattered hearthstone wall. As Marcus placed his heavy boot upon first wooden step leading overhead, he felt no vibration through wood, no cold draft rising from pit, no draft rising from root pit, and no echo of father's voice. No echo of his father's voice calling through hollow plaster walls. The house had surrendered its spoken speech to ancient living earth below, securing its permanent place, standing as a silent sentinel over graves. Standing as a silent sentinel over unwritten graves of Blackwood Basin Valley. When Marcus pushed open heavy oak cellar door, morning sun was breaking. It was breaking through dense pine canopy of Berkshire Ridge in light, casting long golden ribbons of light across quiet kitchen in morning air. The storm had completely passed, leaving forest washed clean and quiet, leaving forest wrapped in a crisp autumn chill smelling of pine needles, smelling purely of pine needles and damp earth after long cold night. The kitchen floorboards, once warped and weeping blue clay, were dry now. Their raw oak grain was smooth beneath his boots as he walked across. The iron wood carving chisel wedged between ceiling joists was gone in morning, leaving only a clean narrow mark in timber where blade had rested past. Standing by open kitchen window, Marcus looked out across silent clearing, looking toward ancient timber line, where mist was slowly burning away, where mist was burning away under rising sun over mountain ridge line. He unclasped leather satchel at his side and placed salt-sealed ledger. He placed salt-sealed ledger onto solid oak dining table in room center. The volume lay cold and heavy in morning light, its clasp shut tight. Its heavy iron clasp was shut tight against any future attempt to open. The story of unbroken fast of St. Jude was no longer an active curse. No longer an active curse haunting dark halls of Blackwood Basin Valley. It had become an archived record, a closed chapter in dark history. A closed chapter in dark spiritual history of region beneath Old Ridge. Marcus knew that if an archivist or a seeker of old mysteries came, if they were to stumble upon volume in some forgotten vault decades later, they would find no legible prayers or ordinary family records within pages. They would find only precise, unyielding lines of ancient land survey, carved into parchment smelling faintly of river salt, hemlock, and stone. Smelling faintly of salt, mountain hemlock, and cold subterranean stone. Marcus turned away from table and walked out onto front porch outside, where Clara was already standing on top step, watching morning light fill. Watching morning light fill valley floor with warm gold in quiet air. The sound of mountain stream flowing through Hemlock Grove was clear, flowing clear and uninterrupted, carrying no hidden raspy whispers inside, carrying no hidden cadences or raspy whispers in its flowing current now. The house behind them stood solid and grounded upon living mountain earth, its stone chimney rising straight into clear blue sky above roof ridge, its timbers secured by silent pact forged deep within earth beneath hearth. As they stepped off porch and began walk down Old Forestry Road away, walking down unpaved road toward county line, Marcus did not look back. He did not look back at ancestral homestead standing silent in sun. The boundary of Blackwood Basin had been drawn, accounts balanced fully, and the silence that remained over valley was finally at peace forever. If this file kept you awake tonight, leave a comment below with your thoughts, or share your own encounter. Until next time, pleasant nightmares.